She called me while I was elbow deep in drywall dust, and the first thing she said wasn't hello. Your father and I have made a decision about the property in Sudbury. I set down my putty knife. There was something in her voice, that flat, measured calm she uses when she's already decided and is only calling to inform, not discuss. We're giving Marcus the house on Lakeshore, she continued, and the rental on Cedar Street. I waited. For you, we've decided on the cabin. The cabin. 45 minutes north of Sudbury proper, off a gravel road that turns into a mud river every spring. 212 acres of Canadian shield rock and spruce trees, a structure my grandfather built in 1961 that had been sitting empty since 2018. No running water since the pipes froze and burst that January. Roof that bowed in the middle like a question mark. My mother used to joke that the only things living there were squirrels and regret. I heard her laugh, just a little on the other end of the line. Not a mean laugh. Worse than that, an embarrassed one, like she was acknowledging the absurdity herself. We know it needs work, she said. But Marcus has the business. He has a family to think about. You're young, you're capable. I didn't say anything for a long moment. Outside my apartment window, February in Toronto was doing its usual thing. Gray sky, gray street, that particular shade of gray that makes you forget the sun is a real thing that exists. How much are the back taxes? I finally asked. A pause. 11,000? When by the end of the fiscal year? April 30th. Otherwise, it goes to the municipality. She said it like she was telling me the weather. Like this was a minor administrative detail, and not the part where I either took on a crumbling property with $11,000 in debt attached to it, or watched it disappear from our family entirely. Your brother has already signed his paperwork, she added. Of course he had. I said I needed to think about it. She said she knew I'd make the right decision. We hung up and I stood there in my dusty apartment with plaster on my hands and something very cold settling into my chest. That was March of last year. And I want to tell you exactly what happened after, because I've thought about it almost every day since, and I've finally decided I'm ready to talk. My brother is 4 years older than me. Growing up, he was the one my parents pointed to when they talked about success. He had the grades, the handshake, the natural confidence that made adults lean in when he spoke. By 30, he had a mortgage, a wife, 2 kids, and a contracting business that did well enough to be respectable. My parents talked about him the way some people talk about a blue-chip investment, reliably, proudly, in terms of what he'd return. I was the other one, not a failure, just, not Marcus. I got a trade certificate in carpentry, spent my 20s doing residential renovations, saved carefully, lived small. I loved the work. There's something about taking a space that's been neglected and making it worth something again. My parents understood this intellectually but not emotionally. My mother once introduced me at a family dinner as our daughter who does renovations with the same tone you'd use to say, our daughter who collects bottle caps. My father passed when I was 28. The cabin had been his, passed down from his father. He never fixed it up because he never had the money, and by the time Marcus and I were old enough to help, he was sick, and then he was gone, and the cabin just sat there, holding its breath. When my mother called me that February, I understood immediately what was happening. Marcus had asked for the Lakeshore house. He probably asked over Christmas, sitting across from her at the dinner table with his wife next to him and his kids eating shortbread, and she said yes before the conversation was over. The cabin was what was left. I drove up to see it in March. 6 hours round trip, most of it on the 400 North. I parked at the end of the lane because my car wouldn't make it through the ice and walked the last quarter mile in my boots. When I saw it, I stood there for a long time. The roof was bad but not catastrophic. The burst pipes were in the basement utility room. Contained, fixable. The main structure was solid, my grandfather having been the kind of man who didn't do anything halfway. The land itself was extraordinary. Mixed forest, a small lake at the back of the property, Canadian shield outcroppings that turned pink at sunset in a way that made you feel like you were standing somewhere sacred. I sat on the front step in the cold and did the math in my head. 11,000 in back taxes, maybe 40 to 60,000 in repairs to make it livable. Another 20 to really do it right. That was a number I could reach, slowly with my savings and careful work. The property itself, 212 acres waterfront, within an hour of a mid-sized city with a growing remote work population, was worth something. Potentially a great deal of something if handled correctly. I called my mother on the drive home and told her I'd take it. She sounded genuinely surprised. I heard relief in her voice too, which told me she'd been worried the cabin would become the family's problem again. She thanked me. She said I was being very mature about it. I signed the paperwork in April, paid the back taxes from my savings, and got to work. I want to be honest about how hard the next 14 months were. I kept my Toronto clients during the week and drove up to the cabin on weekends. I stayed in a tent the first 2 months because the inside wasn't habitable. My neighbor, a retired man named Gerald who lived 3 kilometers down the road and had known my grandfather, brought fuck off some Saturday mornings and told me what the property had looked like when he was young. He became, in a quiet way, one of the most important people in that chapter of my life. I replaced the pipes myself, repaired the roof with a crew of 2 guys I'd worked with in the city, rebuilt the front porch, restored the original hardwood floors my grandfather had laid by hand, which turned out to be white oak under 40 years of grime. I insulated, rewired with a licensed electrician, updated the kitchen, and put in a proper septic system in late summer when the ground thawed enough to dig. By the following spring, the cabin wasn't a cabin anymore. It was a home. Warm, solid, beautiful in the particular way of old things that have been cared for rather than replaced. The land had a trail system now, and the dock at the lake was rebuilt, and on a clear morning standing at the water's edge, I would sometimes feel something I can only describe as disbelief. That this was mine, that I had made it what it was, that the thing my family had handed me as a consolation prize had become, quietly and through a lot of frozen fingers and sore muscles, something extraordinary. I had also, by that point, incorporated it as a numbered company in Ontario, a holding entity that owned the property and any future income it generated. My accountant had suggested it early on. Liability protection, tax advantages, cleaner succession planning. I filed the paperwork in November and forgot about it almost immediately because I was busy and it seemed like housekeeping. I should clarify, my mother did not know about the company. Neither did my brother. To them, it was still just the cabin. They had stopped asking about it after the first few months, which suited me fine. The trouble started the following June. I'd been posting some photos online, not many, just a few pictures of the restoration progress that some friends had encouraged me to share. The lake at sunrise, the white oak floors after the third coat of oil finish, the view from the back porch in early spring when the ice on the lake had just broken up. Normal things, the kind of documentation you do when you're proud of something you built. My sister-in-law saw them. She called my mother, who called me on a Thursday evening while I was pricing rough sawn lumber at a local mill. "Your brother wants to come up and see the property," my mother said. "We all do this weekend." I said that was fine. I had nothing to hide. What I had not anticipated was what coming to see the property actually meant. They arrived Saturday morning, my mother, Marcus, his wife, and their 2 kids. I had coffee ready, and the place clean. My mother walked in and stood in the front room for a long moment without speaking. Then she turned to look at the floors, the restored trim, the new windows that framed the birch trees outside like paintings. "You've done something remarkable here," she said. She didn't say it like a compliment. She said it like a calculation. We had lunch. My brother was quiet in a way I'd never seen from him. He's usually the one filling every silence, and he kept looking out the window toward the lake. His wife kept asking questions. "How much land again? What's the assessment? Are those kilometers of waterfront or just the one bay?" After lunch, my mother asked if she and I could take a walk. We went down to the dock and stood there looking at the water. She waited for me to speak first, which is one of her techniques. When I didn't, she said, "I owe you an apology." I looked at her. "When we gave you this property, we both thought, it would be a burden for you, a difficult thing. We didn't think you'd be able to make anything of it." I said I understood. "Which is why," she continued, and her voice shifted into something careful, "we think the family arrangement should be reconsidered. Marcus has been struggling with the business. The economy has been, well, you know. And a property like this, with the right management, could help stabilize things for everyone." I felt the cold again, the same cold from February. "What are you proposing?" I asked. "We'd like you to sign it over to Marcus. We can compensate you, a fair amount, not the full market value, but something. And you'd still be part of the family enterprise. We could structure it so you have a role here." I turned to look at the lake. A pair of loons were out past the dock, moving slow and easy across the dark water. "I'll think about it," I said. She put her hand on my arm. "Don't take too long. Marcus needs to know what his options are." That night after they left, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Then I called my accountant. My accountant's name is Philippa, and she is the kind of person who speaks slowly and precisely and is almost never wrong about anything financial. I told her what had happened. She listened without interrupting, which is also one of her techniques. When I finished, she said, "Remind me, who currently owns the shares of the holding company?" I do. 100%, and the property is titled in the company name. Yes, so when your mother asks you to sign it over to Marcus, she's asking you to transfer the shares of a private Ontario corporation. Yes. There was a pause. Does she know that's what she's asking? I don't think she understands the structure at all. Another pause. Then Philippa said something that would become, looking back, the pivot point of the whole story. There's something you might want to consider. The next time my mother called, she did not wait for pleasantries. Have you thought about what we discussed? I have, I said. I'm willing to transfer the shares. She exhaled with visible relief. I'm so glad. I knew you'd. There are conditions, I said. I want Marcus to come up and review the company records himself. He's a businessman, he should understand what he's taking on. She said that seemed very reasonable. Marcus came up the following Saturday. I had printed the corporate documents organized in a binder. The articles of incorporation, the shareholder register, the resolutions, the property title in the company name, the most recent financial statements. I also printed the environmental assessment I'd commissioned the previous fall, which had flagged a legacy issue on the northeastern corner of the property, an old fuel oil tank that had been buried there sometime in the 1970s pre-regulation and had been leaking into the soil in a slow, contained way for probably 30 years. The assessment was not classified information. It was a document I had ordered myself. It was in the binder behind tab 7. Marcus did not read tab 7. He read the property valuation, done at my request by a licensed appraiser that spring, which came in at $840,000 for the land and improvements. He read the income projections I'd put together, which showed what the property could generate as a short-term rental over a 5-year period. He did not ask about liabilities. He did not ask about the environmental report. He asked about the lake access, the road maintenance responsibilities, and whether the building permits for the renovations had all been properly closed. They had. I had been very careful about permits. He signed the share transfer agreement at my kitchen table. I witnessed it. We shook hands. I'll have my lawyer do a final review before we file, he said. Of course, I said. His lawyer, I later learned, spent approximately 40 minutes on the file before signing off, which is 40 minutes less than this situation deserved. The share transfer was registered 4 weeks later. Marcus was now the sole shareholder of the numbered company. The company owned the property. The property had, embedded in it, a legacy contamination issue that under Ontario's Environmental Protection Act created a legal obligation for the responsible party to remediate, an obligation that transferred with ownership. The estimated cost of remediation, between $60,000 and $110,000, depending on the extent of the plume. I had known about this since October. I had been working with an environmental consultant on a remediation plan and had set aside funds accordingly. I had planned to handle it quietly, the way I handled everything else on that property, and absorb the cost as part of the overall investment. When I transferred the shares, I also transferred the obligation. I transferred it to my brother, who had the property appraised, signed papers at a kitchen table, and handed me a bank draft for $40,000 as fair compensation. I want to say clearly that I did not deceive my brother about this. The document was in the binder, tab 7. The transfer agreement included a standard clause acknowledging that the purchaser had reviewed all corporate records. His lawyer signed off. In Ontario, a share purchase agreement operates under the principle of buyer due diligence. It is the responsibility of the purchasing party to investigate what they are acquiring. I simply did not point it out. I have thought about that distinction a lot. I don't think I did something wrong, but I know it exists in a gray area, and I don't want to pretend otherwise. What I will say is that my brother signed a document at my kitchen table, transferring to himself a numbered company he had spent perhaps 2 hours evaluating in exchange for $40,000 for a property his family had handed me as something they believed was worthless. He did not read tab 7 because it didn't occur to him that I would have found and documented and been actively managing a problem that he didn't know existed. He assumed the property was simple. He assumed I was simple. That assumption was the thing that cost him. My mother called me 3 weeks after the transfer was complete. Marcus's lawyer had by that point done a more thorough review of the corporate records in preparation for some financing Marcus wanted to arrange against the property. They had found the environmental assessment. Do you want to explain this? My mother said. Her voice was something I hadn't heard from her before. Not anger, exactly. More like she was standing at the edge of something and trying not to look down. I included it in the corporate records, I said. Tab 7. He didn't. She stopped. He didn't read it. I know. Silence. The remediation is going to cost them somewhere between 60 and 100,000, I said. I've already done the groundwork with an environmental consultant. I can share those files with Marcus if he wants a head start. Why didn't you just tell him? I thought about February, about the word cabin said with a laugh, about the Lakeshore house and the Cedar Street rental and the phone call where she told me, with relief in her voice, that I was being very mature about it. I gave him everything I had on the property, I said. He made a business decision. That's what businessmen do. She didn't say anything for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet in a way I'd never heard from her either. I was wrong, she said, about what we thought you could do, about what you were worth. I've been wrong about that for a long time. It was the most honest thing she'd said to me in years. I didn't have a response that felt adequate, so I just said, I know. In the months that followed, Marcus and his wife negotiated with the environmental consultant, the same one I'd been working with as it turned out, because there aren't many who specialize in legacy fuel oil contamination in Northern Ontario, and I'd given Marcus her contact information. The remediation ended up costing $83,000. Marcus refinanced some business assets to cover it. His wife, I heard from a mutual cousin, was not pleased about the refinancings. My mother has called me 7 times since that last conversation. The first few were tense and brief. The more recent ones have been longer. She asked about my work. She asked if I was thinking about doing more projects up north. She asked, carefully and without saying it directly, whether I might be interested in the kind of thing that people do when they have land and skills and time. Whether I might build something up there, something lasting. I told her I was thinking about it. The truth is, I've been more than thinking. I filed to convert the property, which I had reacquired from my brother at the $40,000 I'd paid him, after a negotiation that took 3 weeks and a lot of careful conversation, into a registered short-term rental operation. The bookings for summer are almost entirely full. Gerald comes over sometimes and drinks coffee on the dock, and says my grandfather would have been pleased. I think he's probably right. I used to believe that what happened to me was something that happened because my family underestimated me. That's part of it. But the larger thing, the thing I understand now in a way I didn't then, is that I was handed something that looked like nothing. A broken-down cabin on a gravel road with $11,000 in debt attached to it, and instead of feeling humiliated, I chose to find out what it actually was. What it actually was mine. Completely, legally, undeniably mine. Everything I did on that land, I did with my own hands and my own money and my own decision-making, and no one could walk up to me and say otherwise. My mother gave me the wrong thing, and it turned out to be exactly the right thing. I don't think she's laughing about it anymore. And honestly, neither am I, but for very different reasons. If you've ever had someone in your life hand you the thing they thought would break you, I want you to know something. Sometimes the thing that looks like a punishment is the only gift that was ever really yours to keep. The question isn't whether they meant it that way. The question is what you decide to do with it once their backs are turned, and it's just you and the work and the particular quiet of a Canadian morning when the ice has just gone off the lake and everything finally is yours.